I was 50 when an accident put me in a coma. I stayed like that for more than 5 years. Everyone thought I could not hear, but I did. I heard my daughter asking the doctor how long it would take before she got my money. I heard my son arguing about who would get my house. When I finally woke up, the real shock was not that I survived. It was knowing exactly what they had said. My name is Thomas Reed, a grandfather who kept this house standing with overtime, ledgers, and a red toolbox that smells like machine oil. I trust locks that click, signatures that match, and promises you can hold in your hand. I raised 2 children under a simple code: measure twice, return what is not yours, and pay what you owe. I was not perfect, but I was present. Birthdays in the kitchen, school meetings after graveyard shifts, fixes made before dawn so they could sleep. When I became a widower, I kept the routines because routines keep the roof on. I planned to leave the house to them in equal parts with a note about the maple out back and how its roots run straight. I thought I had taught them to stand straight too. I thought respect was something we had already settled in ink. The first breath felt like gravel. My throat burned from tubes that were already gone. A nurse said my name and cried into her mask. The ceiling tiles were a map I did not know. My body was thin and heavy at the same time. Time had passed without me, and it had left marks. They told me the year. They said I had been non-responsive. I let them talk. I nodded when I could. I did not tell them that I remembered the night shifts and the squeak of the wheels. I did not tell them about voices that climbed over me like cold water. I kept that for myself, like money in a shoe. Doctors came with clipboards. They spoke slowly. They said I might have holes in my memory. They asked if I knew who I was. I said my name. I said my father's name. I said my wife's name, and I felt the room tilt when I said it. She had been gone 2 years. The nurse told me. I stared at the curtain and counted the metal rings. I did not cry then. I could not bear to make a sound. My children arrived with flowers and quick eyes. They stood close, but not too close, like people near a ledge. They called me Dad, with a brightness that was too clean. I watched their hands. My daughter checked her phone every few minutes. My son shifted weight like a man waiting for a number to be called. I thanked them for coming. I asked what day it was. I asked about the weather. I kept my questions small and slow. At night I lay awake and listened. It was a habit I knew well now. Nurses whispered in the hall. Machines clicked and sighed. My body learned the new schedule of pills and checks. I asked for a pad and pen. I wrote the date every morning the way I used to write it at work, as if a page could hold life still for a second. The speech therapist came. She had patient hands. She told me we would take it one word at a time. I had words. I had too many. I stacked them inside my chest and let only a few out. I saved the hard ones for later. On the 3rd day, the social worker asked me about my plans. She smiled like a person who had seen many families in many storms. She asked if I had a power of attorney. She asked about my house. I said I would need to look at the papers when I got home. She wrote something in her file. Her pen moved fast at the words house and power. Late one evening, a young nurse I did not know changed the water in the vase. She thought I was asleep. She spoke softly to another aide. The daughter's been calling about his insurance. Says she needs to update something. The aide said she did not deal with that. They left. I opened my eyes and watched the door swing shut. I tested my hands, my voice, my patience. I waited for the right moment. I knew my strength would return in inches, not miles. That was all right. Inches are enough when you are measuring the truth. On the day they moved me to rehab, my daughter hugged me and smelled like new leather. My son said he would check on the house. I thanked them again. I kept my face calm. The therapist wheeled me out, and the sunlight hit me like a bell. I had survived. That was the headline they could see. The real headline sat behind my eyes. I knew what they had said in that room. I knew the tone and the speed. I knew where their minds had gone when they thought I was gone. I would not forget it. Not for a day, not for an hour. I survived. They did not know what I knew. Rehab smelled like bleach and old coffee. The hallways were wide and bright. I spent my mornings learning how to stand without tipping. My legs shook as if they remembered falling. The therapist kept a belt around my waist and called it a safety measure. I called it a leash in my head, then stopped. I did not want anger to lead me around. Each day I practiced simple things. I held a cup of water without spilling. I buttoned a shirt. I wrote my name 10 times in a row. I said the months of the year. I made my voice steady. The nurse told me I was doing well. I thanked her. I kept my eyes on the work and my ears on the hallway. My children visited on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They arrived with exactness, like people keeping appointments. My daughter set a small gift on the tray each time. A book she had not opened. A plant that needed water. My son brought folded mail, always sorted into neat stacks. He said, "Thought you'd like to keep up." He smiled in short bursts and looked at the clock. I asked about birthdays I had missed. I asked who came to the hospital early, who left late. I asked what songs they played at the holidays. I made it all sound like a foggy dream. They answered quickly and with little detail. It was the speed that interested me. People who are sure take their time. In the therapy room, I learned to walk without a walker for 3 steps. I felt like a tree in the wind. The therapist clapped. I nodded. Every small win was a life preserved. Every step was not just about walking. It was about standing up in front of my own children and not shaking. One evening, my daughter brought a stack of forms to sign later when you are ready. She said the words lightly. The top sheet was about mail forwarding. I ran my finger along the edge and said nothing. I handed them back and told her we would do everything at home when my papers were in front of me. She smiled like that was fine. The smile hung in the air a second too long. My son talked about the house. He said the gutters needed work. He said, "If this is too much for you, Dad, we can find something sensible." He had the careful tone of someone selling a plan. I asked what he meant by we. He said, "Family." I nodded and looked at the clock he kept checking. I let silence sit between us until he shifted in his chair. On Sunday, the chaplain stopped by. He asked if I wanted to talk. I said I wanted to listen. He spoke about coming back from long sleep. He said families are tested when time bends. I told him some things did not bend. They broke. He said he would pray for patience. I said I would take strength. He laughed once and then looked at my hands, thin but steady. At night I practiced sentences I would need later. I tried them in a whisper. I cut them shorter each time. I removed anything that could be called drama. I wanted clean lines and hard facts. I wanted to sound like a man who had worked his whole life, because I had. By the end of the second week, I could walk the length of the hall and back with a cane. The therapist said I would be discharged soon. I felt a knot in my chest that was not fear or hope. It was readiness. Home would give me answers I could touch. My daughter hugged me at the door on discharge day. She said, "We are just glad you are here." My son slapped my shoulder. "We will help you sort everything," he said. I smiled and thanked them, as if help was what I needed. Help was not what I needed. I needed the truth to stand up in its own shoes. They watched the transport aide wheel me down the ramp. I raised my hand and waved. The sun was sharp and loud. The car door closed. The city moved around us, busy with its own life. I looked ahead and thought of my living room, my desk, my safe, my tools. I kept my voice soft, my eyes open, and my questions small. I pretended ignorance to measure them. The house unlocked with a click I knew. The air inside felt different. Windows that I used to crack an inch were shut tight. The living room had been rearranged. Chairs faced a television I did not recognize. The rug was new. My wife's picture sat on a different shelf. I felt the room resist me, like a dog that had learned new rules. I walked slow and took notes in my head. My cane tapped once for each item I remembered. The kitchen had fresh handles on the cupboards. The coffee tin was gone from its spot. The drawer with the warranties held nothing but dry pens and takeaway menus. The fridge had my son's favorite soda and none of mine. My daughter said, "We tried to keep things neat for when you came back." I said, "Thank you," and opened the next drawer. The bedroom smelled like someone else's laundry. My wife's jewelry box stood where it always had, but it was light when I lifted it. 2 rings were missing. Her wedding band. My father's signet ring, which I kept next to it out of habit, as if the 2 men were in the same conversation. The indentations were there. The rings were not. I set the box down without a sound. I eased into the hallway and went to the closet with the safe. The safe had a metal door that never lied. The keypad had faint scratches around the numbers. They had always been clean before. I typed the code. The door opened. Inside were documents, a folder with the title to the house, a binder with account numbers, and a small envelope where my wife kept her letters. I counted slowly. Nothing obvious was missing, but the order was wrong. Pages were not sitting flush. Someone had been here in a hurry. The garage had been swept, but not by me. A shelf looked thinner. My set of drills was gone. The old red box that held my socket wrenches was there, but light. I opened it and found 3 sockets where there should have been 20. On the workbench lay a receipt from a hardware store dated last winter with my son's name at the top. It listed gutter spikes and sealant. It did not list the drills. I slid the receipt into my pocket. Back in the kitchen, a neat stack of cards sat on the table. "Get well" in gold letters. I read each one. Cousins, neighbors, church friends. Their words were kind and plain. Beneath them, someone had tucked an insurance letter. The envelope was addressed to me at a post office box I did not own. Inside, a form asked to confirm a change of address and a change of contact phone number. The date was during the 3rd year of my coma. I read it twice. I read it a 3rd time to calm the heat building in my face. I placed the letter back in its envelope and slid it under the "Get Well" card so my hands would not tear it. I looked at the wall clock. The ticking sounded smug. I took a glass from the shelf and poured water. My hand shook once. I set the glass down, held the edge of the counter, and waited until the room settled. My daughter came in with a bag of groceries. She watched me like a nurse watches a patient walk without help. "I picked up fruit," she said. "Your favorite." I thanked her. I asked where the old coffee tin was. She said the tin was old and rusty, so she tossed it. I nodded and said nothing. I asked if she had any mail for me. She said she would bring it over later once she sorted it. When they left for the evening, I walked through each room again. I touched the furniture, the door frames, the empty spaces where small things had once lived. The house had always told me the truth about my own life. It still did. I just had to listen. I took the insurance letter from under the cards and placed it in the safe. I locked the safe and wiped the keypad with a cloth. In the mirror above the sink, I saw a thin man with gray in his beard and something harder in his eyes than the last time he had looked there. I turned off the lights and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. I counted the seconds between the clicks of the refrigerator. I thought about the box at the post office that I had never rented. I thought about the rings that had been slipped off, felt as lightly as a whisper. Someone had moved on my accounts while I was out. Morning brought a weak sun and the smell of fresh paint from a room I had not asked to be painted. The kettle hissed. I made coffee in a plain new pot. It did the job, but it did not sound like mine. I stood at the counter and waited for their car to pull into the driveway. They were on time, as if someone had scheduled me. My daughter walked in with another bag, bread, fruit, and a small stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. My son came behind her, holding a measuring tape. He looked at the frames, the windows, the floor. He did not look at me much. We sat at the kitchen table. The morning light hit the cards and made them shine. My daughter put her hand on top of mine. "You scared us," she said. Her voice was soft and quick. "We had to be practical." "Practical how?" I asked. I kept my tone flat and even. I did not want to give them anything to push against. She glanced at my son. He pulled a chair out and sat. He put the measuring tape on the table and let it sit there like a small steel snake. "Dad, you do not need a big house now," he said. "It is too much for you." I sipped the coffee. It was hot and bitter. I looked at the window. The glass needed cleaning. "What does too much mean?" I said. "It means the stairs," he said. "It means the yard. It means you should think about something on one floor, something easy." "Easy for who?" I asked. "For you," he said, but it sounded like a word he had borrowed. My daughter moved the envelopes closer to me. "You got a notice from the insurance," she said. "We should call them. They will want to confirm your details." She smiled. "I can handle it if you like." "I will handle it," I said. I placed my hand on the stack and slid it toward me. I saw the edge of the same letter I had already found. It felt like a card trick where I had already seen the card. She pulled her hand back and folded it in her lap. My son tapped the tape with his finger. "Also the gutters," he said. "I started them last winter, but the sealant did not hold on the north side. If we sell, we should fix that first." He said "we" again like a drumbeat. "I will look at the gutters," I said. "Thank you." Silence came into the room and sat down with us. It was not friendly. My daughter broke it. "You know we love you," she said. "We just want what is best." "What is best," I said, "is that I take time. I will go through my papers. I will speak to my doctor. I will decide." She tried to keep her face calm, but her mouth tightened at the corners. My son leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, as if it had the answer he wanted. He said, "You signed a form before. About mail. We can keep that in place. It is easier." "I did not sign a form," I said. "Right, while you were—" He stopped, as if the word was a cliff. "We handled things." "I will handle things now," I said. He picked up the tape and snapped it back into its case. The sound was sharp. He put the tape in his pocket and stood. "We are trying to make this smooth," he said. "Smooth is not my goal," I said. "True is my goal." My daughter stood too. She put the bag on the counter, as if groceries could soften wood. "We will come by tomorrow," she said. "Call first," I said. "I have therapy in the morning." They looked at each other, as if the schedule had slipped from their hands. My son nodded. My daughter forced another smile. They walked to the door. He said, "We will help you with the deed when you are ready." I watched the door close. The house got quiet again, the way it does after guests leave and you decide what to keep and what to throw away. I took the envelopes to the desk and placed them next to the safe. I wrote the date on a pad and circled it. I made coffee again, this time a little stronger. I stood at the window and watched them back out of the driveway. My son's brake lights flared red and then went dark as they turned onto the street. I stayed at the window until the road was empty and still. It was a small scene in a kitchen, the kind that usually vanishes by dinner. This one did not. It sat in my chest and pressed down. It told me the timetable was not mine yet. They circled my kitchen with careful voices and tidy plans, nudging the mail toward me, talking about stairs and what's best, and watching my hands as if weakness would make me sign the deed away. They believed in their superiority, but I would make the first real strike. You would not want to miss it. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I started with the hospital. Records do not forget, even when people do. I called medical records from my kitchen, the same phone that used to ring at 3 a.m. when a boiler failed. A clerk told me how to request my file. I drove down with my cane and a folder. I signed where they pointed and waited on a hard chair that had seen too many winters. They handed me a packet in a manila envelope. It felt heavier than paper. Visitor logs, nursing notes, charts with lines that climbed and fell. I sat at a corner table and spread the pages a few at a time. I read slowly. I did not skim. This was my life and my house on paper. The visitor log listed dates and times. Names came in pairs. My daughter's name at 8:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. My son's name at 9:12 p.m. on the same night. Again the next week. Again the next month. The notes in the margin said, raised voices in hallway. A nurse had written, ask family to keep discussions outside unit. The handwriting was firm. It was not written for me, but it was written. I kept going. In the third year, there was an entry about a notary inquiry. A staff member had taken a call from a man asking if a notary could visit the unit for a patient's signature. The note said it was declined because the patient was non-responsive. The time was after visiting hours. The callback number was written down. I copied it into my notebook and underlined it. There were also mentions of family disagreements near room. The notes were short, the way busy people write. They were enough. A nurse had documented 2 people arguing about property decisions. The words were plain. It was not a novel. It was a record. I asked to speak to the head nurse on duty that day. I thanked her for the care I had received. I told her I wanted to be sure staff understood that no one was to make decisions for me now. She nodded. She said the team would note it in my file. That was good, but it was not what I was really after. I was after dates and proof. Feelings were for another time. On my way out, I stopped at the chapel. I did not pray. I sat and counted the steps that had brought me here. I had been out of the world for years, yet the world had left footprints that led straight to me. It felt strange and simple at the same time. I did not need to guess anymore. I could measure. Back home, I made a fresh folder and labeled it in block letters. Hospital. I slid the copies inside. I set the folder on my desk, then opened the safe and looked at the deed for a moment. Paper against paper. One told me what was mine. The other told me who had circled it when I could not stand up. That night I slept as if the house itself stood guard. In the morning I woke before the sun and read the notes again. I did not look for excuses in the handwriting. I looked for patterns. The pattern was simple. They came late. They argued. They asked for a notary when I could not lift my own hand. I poured coffee and stared at the window until the glass brightened. I did not feel rage. I felt the weight of a wrench in my mind, the one you reach for when a bolt will not turn. This was not about sudden shock. This was about fit and torque. I would turn this the right way. I set the hospital folder next to a clean pad. I wrote a list of calls in a neat column. Pawn shops, storage units, banks, notaries. I would not accuse anyone. I would collect proof. Proof does not shout. It stands. It was time to document their impatience, and I would not ignore that chance. Next, it was about the tools. The drills had gone missing while I was asleep. Tools leave trails when they get sold. I drove to the closest pawn shop with the red sign that has been there since my kids were small. The bell over the door sounded tired. The man behind the counter had seen every kind of story and did not care for most of them. I laid my old customer card on the glass. I said my name and asked if he could search for my serial numbers. He shrugged and typed. I gave him the numbers from my ledger. He scrolled and read. He said a set had come in last winter. The serials matched. The seller's ID was scanned. He printed a receipt. He slid it to me without ceremony. I thanked him. I asked if I could have a copy of the ID scan. He said policy would not allow it, but law enforcement could request it. I nodded. I was not the law, but I knew how to reach it. On the way home, I stopped at a storage facility. The clerk was young and nervous. I asked if anyone had a unit in my surname. He checked the system. He said there was a unit leased last spring by a woman with my daughter's name. The inventory description field had tools, totes, personal. I asked if I could see the lease. He said only the lessee or law enforcement could. I asked for dates and the unit number. He gave me those. I wrote them down the way I used to write down boiler pressures. Exact, no room for mistake. I went to my bank next. The manager had been there for years. She remembered my wife. She shook my hand and asked how I was holding up. I told her I needed to review my signature card and any notes on my accounts over the last 5 years. We sat in her small office with the glass wall and the fake plant. She pulled my file. She frowned, then squared her shoulders like a person changing from sympathy to business. Someone had tried to move funds 2 years ago, she said. The teller flagged it because the signature did not match. The person left when asked for ID. There was an incident note. She printed it. She also printed the copy of my old signature card and had me sign a new one in front of her. She suggested a fraud alert. I agreed. She offered to set text alerts for any activity. I said yes to everything that tightened the lines. I left with a small stack of paper clipped together. The bank incident note, the new signature card, the alert confirmation. I put them in a fresh folder labeled bank. Then I sat in my car and let the engine idle while I looked at the pawn receipt again. It listed the date and time, the model, the serial numbers. It had the price my tools fetched. It was lower than what I had paid, but still too high for a man to sleep through. At home, I called the storage facility again and asked for their policy on law enforcement requests. I wrote the process down. I called the pawn shop and asked the same. I called the police non-emergency line and asked how to file a report for suspected elder financial abuse and property theft. The woman on the line spoke kindly but clearly. She gave me a case number after I answered her questions. She said an investigator would follow up. I thanked her and wrote the number at the top of my pad. I placed the hospital folder, the bank folder, and a new folder labeled Tools in a stack. I made a copy of the insurance letter with the fake address change and slid it into a folder labeled Insurance. The stack looked like a small wall. I had built many walls in my life. This one would hold. I did not call my children. I did not ask for explanations. Explanations crumble when pushed against paper. I would not argue on a couch. I would set documents on a table and let them speak. That was my plan. I had leverage. The visitor log, a pawn receipt, a storage lease, and the bank's incident notes. Lastly, I needed a lawyer who would talk in plain terms. I called the firm that handled the estate for a friend who died last year. The partner was a woman my age with eyes that missed nothing. We met in a small conference room with a window that looked over a parking lot. I liked that view. Parking lots tell the truth about who shows up. I laid the folders on the table in order: hospital, bank, tools, insurance. I spoke without heat, just dates, times, places, and what was missing. She did not interrupt much. She asked short questions when she needed a hinge tightened. She took notes in a narrow hand. When I finished, she leaned back and said we would do 3 things right away. First, revoke any prior powers of attorney if any existed, even old drafts. Second, file a fraud alert with the county recorder against any attempt to transfer title. Third, move the house and accounts into a living trust with me as trustee and a corporate successor, so no one could tug at me when I was weak. I signed the revocation on the spot. She drafted the notice to the recorder while I waited. She called her contact at the title company and asked for a courtesy hold on any suspicious activity. Then she introduced me to a quiet man from Adult Protective Services who worked with the district attorney's office on elder financial abuse. He had a calm voice and hands that stayed still. He listened to my summary and looked at the hospital notes for a long minute. He asked for copies of the pawn receipt and the bank incident note. I gave them to him. We filed the trust paperwork that afternoon. It was a stack with tabs like a careful map. She explained each section. I did not need a lecture. I needed a shield. We recorded the new deed into the trust. We retitled my accounts. The bank manager faxed confirmations and called me by name as if to anchor me where I belonged. I put every confirmation into the trust folder and made duplicates for the safe. At home, I opened the safe and moved the deed to the trust binder. I slid my wife's letters back into their envelope and set them on top of the trust papers for a second, like a hand on a shoulder, then put them back in their own place. I changed the safe code and wiped the keypad again. That evening, I received a voicemail from my daughter. Her voice was bright. She said they could sit down and make a plan for the house this weekend. I did not answer. I wrote the time of the call in my log. I would not fight on the phone. I would not speak without a witness now. That is not paranoia. That is policy. The lawyer called the next morning. She had already sent letters revoking any authority my children might claim. She had mailed notices to my insurance company and my bank listing me as the only authorized party. She had requested the notary journal from the mobile notary who was contacted during my coma years and flagged by the hospital. She spoke like a person closing doors in a storm. I made a simple dinner, washed the plate, and put it in the rack. The house felt more like itself. It had weight again. It did not tremble when the phone rang. I let it ring. I slept hard. When I woke, the trust binder sat on the desk like a heavy book with a plain title. I ran my fingers along the spine and felt steadier than I had felt since the day I woke up in that room full of machines. This was not revenge. Not yet. This was air in the lines and pressure at the right level. This was me taking back the work that was mine. My assets were finally under a shield. The lawyer said it was time to stop collecting and start pressing. I felt the truth of that like a steady pulse. Proof without action is just storage. We met in her office that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Outside the window, a gray sky sat low over the parking lot. It looked like weather you work through. We filed the elder financial abuse complaint. I read every line before I signed. My name, their names, the dates from the hospital notes, the bank incident report, the copy of the insurance letter with the false address, the storage unit details, the notary inquiry from those late hours when I could not lift a finger. I signed without shaking. When the pen left the paper, I felt a quiet heat behind my ribs. Not anger, not relief, something simpler. Direction. The judge signed the temporary restraining order in the afternoon based on what we had provided. The stamped copy came back by email. The lawyer printed it and slid it across the table. I held the page by its corners and read the lines twice. I am not a man who likes court, but I respect a seal. It tells you where the line is. She drafted the demand letter next. Return the drills, the missing sockets, anything taken from the house. Stop collecting my mail. A deadline. A consequence. No raised voice on the page. Just wait. We added a notice to preserve communications. Texts, emails, voicemails. No deleting, no new phones. No, it must have been a glitch. She read it aloud once, then clicked send. I watched her hand. It did not hesitate. Are you all right? She asked. I am steady, I said. That is what I have. She nodded. Steady wins this. We set the family planning meeting for the end of the week. Plain title, firm agenda, her conference room, a recorder on the table, copies prepared, no surprises, no hallway arguments, a place where a person either tells the truth or leaves a mark by refusing. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the wheel and let the radio stay off. The road I had driven 1,000 times felt honest in a new way. The turn lane, the red light that always runs long. I passed the hardware store and saw men carrying half gallons of paint in paper bags. I used to do that on Saturdays. I thought of my wife for a moment and felt the old ache. Then I pictured her neat handwriting on the labels in our file box. She liked order. She would have liked this order. At home, I stood in the garage and looked at the empty place where the drill set should have been. The pegboard still had the outline of the charger drawn in marker. I rubbed the heel of my hand over the mark. I remembered my grandson asking why we draw shapes for tools. So they come back to their place, I had told him. I had meant the tools. I realized I had meant people too. My phone buzzed. A message from my son. He said we should talk man to man about moving on. I saved it. I did not reply. A minute later, my daughter called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice tried to be gentle and fast at the same time. "We can handle things for you, Dad. It's easier if you let us." I stood in the doorway to the kitchen and stared at the line of light on the floor while she talked. When it ended, I wrote the time in my log and set the phone face down. The county investigator called after dinner. His voice was even. He said he had contacted the pawn shop for the ID scan and the storage facility for the lease. He told me to expect a follow-up and asked if I had any safety concerns. I looked around my kitchen, the cards on the table, the safe in the closet, the trust binder on the desk, and said, "No. I am fine here." "Good," he said. "We will move quickly." After I hung up, I brewed tea and carried the cup to the desk. Steam fogged my glasses for a second. I opened the trust binder and ran a finger along the tab that said deed. I am not sentimental about paper, but I respect what it can do when it is clear. My hand shook once, small as a hiccup, then went still. The lawyer called once more to confirm the meeting time. "They may try to reframe this as misunderstanding," she said. "They can try," I said. "We have dates." "We do," she said. "Bring only your voice." "I will bring the rest." "Thank you," I said, "for speaking plain." "That is the job," she said. I stood by the back door and checked the deadbolt. The click sounded clean. Outside, the maple threw a dark shape across the yard. The house felt like it had its shoulders back. I rinsed the cup, dried it, and set it upside down on the rack. I was not hunting anyone. I was protecting what is mine and what it stands for. That was enough purpose for a man who had been asleep too long. The meeting was on the calendar. The letters were out. The order was signed. Legal pressure replaced polite hints. The conference room was small and bright. A square table, 4 chairs, a glass pitcher with sweating sides. My lawyer set a recorder in the center and pressed a red button. The sound of the click felt heavier than it should. I folded my hands and kept them still. My cane leaned against my chair like a quiet witness. They came in together, my daughter first with a soft smile and fast eyes, my son behind her with shoulders set like a man about to move furniture he did not own. They looked at the window, the cups, the door, not at me. Greed does not like eye contact, it likes calculations. My lawyer introduced herself and read the ground rules. One person speaks at a time. We are recording. We will keep to facts. My daughter started with the word fair. She always liked words that made her feel generous while she was taking. "We just want what is fair," she said, sitting a little forward, palms open. She talked about my care needs and the burden of upkeep. She said a smaller place would be kinder. Her voice tried to make a sale. It was not a sale. It was a reach. My son kept glancing at the folders. He wanted to know what we had, not what I felt. Impatience twitched at the corner of his mouth. He spoke about the market and how now is the time. He talked over his sister once, then apologized without meaning it. He has always liked the sound of his own plan. He does not like the sound of the word no. I listened. My heart did not race. It sat in my chest like a metronome. The years in the dark had trained me to hear and keep hearing. I let them say everything twice. I watched how they said it. The words were about me. The eyes were on the house. My lawyer slid the first folder across the table. Visitor logs, she said. Nursing notes. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean in. She let the paper travel into the space between us like a line being drawn. I watched my daughter smile thin as she read the dates. I watched my son's jaw set when he saw the phrase raised voices. I thought of my wife's letters sitting next to the trust binder at home. She would have wanted me to be steady, not loud. She would have wanted me to finish the job. So I kept my breath slow. I let the room do some work for me. Fluorescent lights hummed the same for saints and thieves. My lawyer added the pawn receipt and the bank incident note to the stack, but did not speak to them yet. She let the logs sit there first, like the first turn of a wrench. I looked at my children and finally spoke. Fair begins with what is mine, I said. The recorder caught the sentence and held it. The pitcher dripped once. My daughter folded her hands so tight her knuckles went white. My son looked at the door as if doors are exits from truth. I stayed in my chair. I had been waiting 5 years to sit upright in this moment. They saw what I knew, and they understood there would be more. I did not disappoint them. My son broke first. He always runs ahead of himself when he smells a finish line. This is ridiculous, he said, tapping the table. You were not even there, Dad. You do not know what was said. You barely remember anything from that time. He threw the words like stones at a window he hoped would crack. I let them fall. I had carried heavier. I was there, I said. My voice felt like the floor, plain, level, hard to argue with. I heard you, both of you. I remember the words because they were the first ones I carried out of the dark. I watched the sentence land. It did not explode. It settled. That is worse for guilty people. It asks them to sit with themselves. My daughter tried to patch the hole. We were scared, she said quickly. We thought you were gone. We were talking about practical things. Her voice sped up the way it does when she sees a thing she wants sliding away. Envy edged the corners. Envy for a house that is not a trophy. Envy for a legacy she did not build but wanted credit for carrying. My lawyer did not interrupt. She had the patience of brick. She opened the next folder and placed the pawn receipt on top, angled so the serial number faced my son. He looked at it and then at me. He has my eyes, which made it worse. I kept my face as still as I could. Those are my drills, I said. You grew up with them 2 feet from where you ate dinner. You know the feel of their weight. You know where they belong. He tried to smile. Maybe we sold some things to pay for. For what? I asked. For gutters you did not finish? For a house you were measuring while I could not stand? I kept my voice low. The recorder would hear every word no matter the volume. He leaned back and crossed his arms. Impatience took the wheel again. This is about moving forward, he said. You cannot keep everything like a museum. I am not keeping everything, I said. I am keeping what is mine. My daughter stared at the visitor log again, as if staring would change the dates. We were just trying to help, she said. We did what we thought you would want. If you had asked, I said, you would have known what I wanted. Silence opened in the middle of the table. I felt the old ache for the years I had missed, birthdays, the sound of my wife's laugh in the kitchen, but I did not let that ache drive. Grief can be a poor driver. It runs red lights. I kept my hands folded. My lawyer slid the bank incident note into their view. Teller flagged a transfer, she said. Signature did not match. No ID provided. The person left. She did not look up from the page as she read. She did not need to. The words were doing fine on their own. My son muttered, "This is blown out of proportion." He shook his head. He always shakes when he wants the world to blur. I looked at both of them and saw what I had not wanted to see when I first woke up. Not just fear or panic, but want. Want for what was not theirs yet. Want for what I was still sitting here to guard. Evidence speaks once. Verification speaks twice. My lawyer reached for the next folder and laid out the notary journal entry, photocopied and signed by the mobile notary. It showed a date, a time, a location, and a refusal. Patient non-responsive. No ID appointment declined. The handwriting was neat, the kind you use when you know someone will read you closely. My daughter read and blinked. She ran her finger under the line about non-responsive, as if the ink might change if she warmed it. "We were trying to get your affairs in order," she said, softer now. It was confusing. Confusion does not dial a notary after visiting hours. Confusion does not pick a time when a man cannot lift his hand. "You were not confused," I said. "You were in a hurry." My lawyer placed the title company emails next. They showed a quitclaim draft prepared but never executed, sent from my daughter's account by her boyfriend. The subject line had my address. The body read like a form letter. The date landed between two of the visitor log entries labeled raised voices. The neatness of the timing made me feel cold. There is a difference between grief's clumsy hands and greed's steady ones. My son looked at the emails and then at the recorder, as if the machine could be reasoned with. He started to speak and stopped. He bit his lip, not to hold back tears, but to hold back the wrong admission. The lawyer did not gloat. She turned one more page and slid a printed voicemail transcript across to them. My son's message about moving on and acting while the market is good. Dates, times, the phone number, there it was. Impatience and opportunity, dressed up as guidance. I felt something unclench between my shoulders. It was not joy. It was the removal of doubt. Doubt rots a house from the inside. This was air, clean and cold. My daughter whispered, "We thought you were gone." The words landed with less weight than the first time I had heard them inside a room that smelled like antiseptic and sleep. Back then they were knives. Now they were keys that did not fit. "If you thought I was gone," I said, "why were you writing my name on lines I was supposed to sign?" No one answered. The clock on the wall ticked once. My wife would have said, "Finish it now." She hated letting rot sit after you found it. My lawyer gathered the pages into a neat stack and tapped them square. "We have enough," she said, not to me, but to the air. Then she looked at my children. "You may speak to these documents, or you may accept what they say." Verification had done its work. Intent was not a shadow. It stood in the light. She continued without heat. "Sign the stipulation now, comply, and we do not file. Refuse, and we file today and refer for criminal charges. Additionally, Mr. Reed has executed changes to his estate plan. You are removed as beneficiaries." My daughter's mouth fell open, not from sorrow, but from shock that the golden field she had counted on was fenced. Envy flashed. Envy for a scholarship fund she had not heard about yet. Envy for a legacy that would go to strangers who study hard and show up on time. My son's face tightened. He glared at the recorder like a man who wants to break the mirror that is telling the truth. I pulled a slim codicil from my folder and set it beside the stipulation. It bore my wife's maiden name in the title of the new scholarship. I had signed it that morning. My hand had been steady then, too. "This is where the house and the interest will go," I said. "Kids who work with their hands. Kids who do the job and do not steal the tools." My daughter whispered, "Dad, that is cruel." But the word hung there without a place to land. Cruel was asking a notary to come to a bed where a man could not speak. Cruel was prying rings from felt and calling it practical. My son stared at the complaint and tried a last angle. "You are going to drag us through court? Your own children?" "I am going to protect what is mine," I said. "If the court is the tool, I will use it." He looked at the door again, the way people look for exits when corners tell the truth. My lawyer pushed the pens across the table. The plastic clicked against wood. Small sound. Big meaning. They signed the stipulation because consequence is a teacher that does not smile. My lawyer countersigned and turned off the recorder. The red light went dark. We stood. My cane felt light in my hand. My daughter did not meet my eyes. My son muttered something about lawyers, as if law was a trick and not a line. At the door I paused. "There will be boundaries," I said. "Written ones. You will follow them if you want any contact at all." My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The paper behind it did the lifting. The complaint stayed in the folder, ready if they failed. The scholarship file sat in my briefcase, already alive. The room emptied of their plans like air leaving a punctured tire. My legacy moved out of their reach. News moved faster than sense. A cousin called to say I was being harsh. I said I had reasons. He heard it in my voice and backed away. When I hung up, the house felt like it was listening with me. The investigator checked in from the road. He sounded tired but sure. "It lines up," he said. I did not need more than that. I stood in the garage and touched the empty outline where my drill had sat for years. My hand hovered there like it remembered weight. I thought about the nights I had stood in this same spot after late shifts, the soft clink of metal, and my wife calling me in to eat. Grief rose slow and old. It did not knock me down this time. It just stood beside me and kept quiet. Near dusk, a truck rolled up. My son climbed out, older than last month, or maybe I was seeing clearly. He carried my things like they burned. He set them down and stared at the floor so hard I thought he might crack it. "You forgot the charger," I said, gentle. He flinched, fetched it, clicked it into place. For 1 second his face looked like the boy who used to hand me nails, proud to be useful. Then the guard came back. "Anything else?" he asked. "Bring my mail," I said. He nodded and left. Later my daughter slid a padded envelope onto the porch and walked away fast. I watched through the glass. She looked small in the evening light. I did not open the door until her car turned the corner. I laid the envelope on the table and sat with my hands flat. I let quiet do its work. It steadied me better than any speech. By week's end, the empty spaces were filled again. The garage smelled right. I slept through the night. Not because everything was fixed, because I had finally done what needed doing. Then they came in the soft heat after lunch. The maple threw shade across their faces. I waited on the porch with the paper and a pen. My cane leaned against the rail. My heart stayed slow. My daughter started. "We thought you were gone." Her voice wavered at the end. For a breath I saw the baby I held in a hospital room years ago, wrapped tight, fists like seeds. Then the picture cleared. "You acted like I was already dead," I said. "I am not, and I do not give my life away because someone is impatient." My son tried to make it about pride. Dragging family into court. "Protecting what's mine," I said. "That is who I've always been." You know it. I read the boundaries. I did not rush. The words landed one by one. No unannounced visits. No access to my things. Contact in writing. Pay back what you took. Do what the investigator asks. If not, we go forward. The cicadas hummed while I spoke. They sounded steady, like a machine that still runs. My daughter signed first. Her hand shook. She did not reach for me, and I did not reach for her. My son hesitated, jaw tight, then wrote his name like he was trying to carve the table. When they finished, I held out my hand. Keys. A small clatter into my palm. I felt their weight, and every birthday and school night that came with them, and I still slipped the keys into an envelope and sealed it. "We'll be in touch," she said. "In writing," I said. They walked down the path without looking back. The screen door sighed when I closed it. The deadbolt clicked. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second and breathed. Not victory, just a calm that had been missing for too long. A line had been drawn again, and I was glad to be the man who drew it. If you woke to your own children planning your inheritance over your hospital bed, would you draw the line like I did? Or would you do something differently? Please tell me your ideas in the comments.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.